Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
So this happened when I was 11 years old. My mom was about 8 months pregnant with my little brother at the time, and her boyfriend had moved in with us a few months before that. To put it bluntly, the guy was trash. He had this nasty habit of taking out whatever was bothering him on me whenever he got the chance. The whole reason I wasn't supposed to be home that night was because of my mom's pregnancy cravings and diet changes. She was eating stuff that made me sick when I was around it too much, so I've been staying with my grandmother most nights. My grandmother lived close by, and I'd go over there to help her with housework and chores. That evening, I'd finished helping her and had been playing video games at her place for about an hour when I realized I'd left something important at home. I figured I could sneak in, grab what I needed, and head back before anyone noticed. My mom's boyfriend thought I was at my grandmother's house anyway, so it should have been fine. I got home and went straight to my room, trying to be quiet. Everything seemed calm at first. Then around 8 or 9 p.m., I heard the front door slam. The boyfriend was home and I could immediately tell something was wrong by the way he was stomping around and muttering to himself. My mom must have heard it too because I heard her come out of the bedroom. Her voice was tired but gentle when she asked him to please keep it down. She reminded him that the neighbors had complained last time about the noise, and she really didn't want to deal with that again. She had every reason to be exhausted. Her feet were swollen from the pregnancy, and she'd just gotten out of the hospital 3 days earlier because of kidney stones. The woman needed rest, not drama, but asking him to be considerate was too much. He immediately snapped back, asking if she was serious. He said something about this being his house and questioned why she thought she could tell him what to do. My mom tried to explain that she was just asking him to be considerate, but he cut her off. He said he didn't care what she was asking. He started shouting about how he'd had a terrible day and how he came home to her nagging him. Then he really let loose with the obscenities, really horrible stuff that I don't want to repeat. His voice kept getting louder and angrier. I could hear my mom trying to calm him down, but it wasn't working. That's when my instincts kicked in. I'd seen this before. I knew where this was headed. I kept a baseball bat under my bed for protection. I grabbed it and crept toward the hallway, staying low and quiet. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. When I got close enough to see them, my worst fear was confirmed. His hand was raised up high, pulled back like he was winding up for a pitch. My pregnant mother was standing right in front of him, one hand protectively over her belly. I didn't think. I just moved. I swung that bat hard into the back of his leg. I heard the crack before I heard him scream. He went down hard and I didn't stop. I hit him 3 or 4 more times, aiming for his knees because I knew that would keep him down. At some point, I got his left wrist too when he tried to grab at me. My mom yelled at me to stop, saying that was enough. She pulled me back and I finally lowered the bat. He was on the floor writhing and cursing, but he wasn't getting up. My hands were shaking. My mom immediately called my grandmother and then 911. Within minutes, there were sirens outside. A police car and an ambulance pulled up. The paramedics loaded the boyfriend onto a stretcher while he was screaming about how I'd attacked him for no reason. He kept insisting that I was psycho and that I'd come at him with a bat for absolutely nothing. He demanded that the police press charges against me. The police officers looked skeptical, but they had to ask questions. They asked if that was really what had happened. Before my mom or I could answer, my grandmother's car screeched into the driveway. She must have broken every speed limit getting there. She walked right up to the officers and told them absolutely not. She explained that I had never hit anyone without being hit first, not once in my entire life. One of the officers tried to say that they still needed to understand what happened, but my grandmother wasn't having it. She told them that the boyfriend and my daughter had been fighting constantly. She said they'd been having screaming matches that the whole neighborhood could hear, and she suggested they go ask the neighbors themselves if they didn't believe her. The officers looked at each other, and one of them went to knock on a neighbor's door. Sure enough, they confirmed everything. Multiple neighbors verified that they'd heard violent arguments coming from our house for months. The officer turned back to me and asked me to explain why I hit him and why I did it so many times. I told him that the boyfriend could hit me and I'd probably just hide because he was bigger than me. But I explained that he was about to hit my mom and she had my baby brother inside her. I said I didn't want the baby to get hurt, so I hurt him first and made sure he wouldn't be able to do it again. My mom was crying now, nodding along with what I said. She told the officers that she wanted to press charges for assault, child endangerment, and child abuse. My grandmother pulled out her phone and announced that she had recordings of him verbally abusing me. She said she had multiple instances saved. The officers took her phone and listened. Their faces got harder with each second that passed. Long story short, my mom pressed every charge she could. I didn't have to go to the court hearings because they wanted to keep me and my little brother out of it when possible. My grandmother's recordings and the neighbors' testimonies were enough evidence. He got weekend visitation rights, but only at my mom's convenience, and he had to pay child support. My mom never once made it convenient. A few years later, he got himself arrested for something else entirely, and the court revoked his visitation rights permanently. My little brother is a teenager now, and that man has never been part of his life. He doesn't get to see his only child because he thought he could get away with being an abusive piece of garbage. Knowing that he lost everything because of his own actions was satisfying. Don't mess with my family. We'll make sure you regret it. I grew up in a small town in South Africa where most people didn't have much money. My family scraped by, and I learned early on that you had to fight for what was yours because nobody else would do it for you. I'd read the fine print and understand my rights because I'd seen too many people get taken advantage of simply because they didn't know better. A few years back, I was renting a house through a local rental agency. The place was nothing fancy, just somewhere to lay my head at night. I worked long hours at a job that barely paid enough to cover rent and food, and I was careful with every cent. Things were going okay until my circumstances changed. I won't get into all the details, but I needed to move for work. The problem was, my lease still had 5 months left on it. I did my homework. South Africa had just introduced this Consumer Protection Act that said you could cancel any contract with 30 days notice. There might be a cancellation fee, but it couldn't be more than 10% of what remained on the contract. It seemed straightforward to me. I sent the rental agency an email giving them more than 30 days notice that I was canceling my lease. They even sent back a reply saying they'd received my email. After I moved out, I contacted them about getting my deposit back. They sent me an email saying I'd forfeited my entire deposit by canceling the lease early. But it didn't stop there. They also sent me an invoice for 2 more months' rent plus the costs of advertising to find a new tenant. The email said I was responsible for finding a replacement tenant myself, and if the house stayed empty, I'd have to keep paying rent every single month until someone moved in. I read that email 3 times, getting more angry each time. This was completely illegal. They were taking advantage of me because they thought I didn't know any better, or maybe because they figured I couldn't afford a lawyer to fight them. And they were right about one thing, I definitely couldn't afford a lawyer. But I could read, and I'd read, the Rental Housing Act cover to cover when I first signed my lease. That's how I learned about the Rental Housing Tribunal. It's this government body that handles disputes between landlords and tenants completely free of charge. I filed a complaint with them, and they scheduled a meeting at a public library about a week later. I showed up wearing my only pair of shoes, which were old and falling apart. I felt completely out of my depth. The rental agent arrived looking like she'd just stepped out of some fancy magazine, and I worried that maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe they'd take one look at me and side with her automatically. Then the head of the tribunal walked in. She was this short woman, modestly dressed, and she had the warmest smile I'd ever seen. She thanked everyone for coming and being on time, mentioning how they'd driven such a long way to be here and how nice it was. She asked if everyone was comfortable, and we all nodded and mumbled that we were fine. She turned to me and asked if I was the tenant. I confirmed that I was. She told me they'd received my complaint and asked if I'd ever spoken to the tribunal before. When I said no, she explained that many people didn't know about the tribunal and asked how I'd heard about them. I told her I'd read the Rental Housing Act. She seemed really pleased by that and said it was very good that I knew my rights. I began to relax a little. She kept calling me dear, and she actually seemed to care about what was happening. For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt like maybe things would work out. Then suddenly this lawyer came bursting into the room, his formal robes billowing out behind him like he was in some kind of movie. He immediately announced that he was moving to dismiss the case. The chair of the tribunal greeted him politely and asked who he was. He said that he was representing the estate agency. She explained that this wasn't a court and that they were mediating here. He shot back that they didn't agree to mediation. The chair told him that he didn't have to agree because they were empowered by the Rental Housing Act. The lawyer mumbled something under his breath and sat down heavily in his chair. One of the tribunal members leaned forward and asked him if he'd received the written complaint. The lawyer said he had and went on to claim that I was arguing the Consumer Protection Act made the invoices invalid, but that the Consumer Protection Act didn't apply to lease agreements. Another tribunal member corrected him, explaining that the act actually referred to authorized governing bodies and empowered those bodies to make determinations individually. The lawyer raised his voice and insisted they weren't authorized. The chair raised her hand gently and reminded him that we were in a library, and the librarians had been kind enough to let us meet there, so we needed to be quiet. She added with a smile that librarians could be dangerous. The tribunal members actually chuckled at that. I found myself fighting back a smile despite my nerves. The lawyer declared that if I wanted to fight this, I could take them to court. He pointed at me with obvious contempt. The chair's smile didn't waver, but her voice took on a steelier edge. She told him that, first of all, he needed to address her as a chair. Second, whether he personally recognized their authority was irrelevant because they were authorized to make this decision. If his client wanted to keep her license, she should listen very carefully to what they were about to say. The lawyer insisted loudly that the Consumer Protection Act didn't apply and that he wasn't going to debate this with us people. Another tribunal member told him that they weren't debating, they were ruling. A third tribunal member chuckled at that. The chair turned to the rental agent and told her plainly that she'd acted illegally and would need to refund my deposit. The agent protested, saying she was within her rights, but the chair cut her off. She ordered the agent to refund the deposit within 48 hours. The lawyer interrupted again, declaring that his client would do no such thing. The chair told him that his client would comply with their ruling or they would garnish her income and she would lose her license. One of the tribunal members pointed out to the chair that the agent wouldn't have an income without a license. The chair agreed that was true and said it would be for the court to decide how her obligations would be met in that case. She advised strongly that the agent should sign. Another tribunal member handed the agent some documents and mentioned that they'd been lenient with the penalty. The agent's eyes lit up and she asked if that meant I would still pay the penalty. She actually sounded pleased about it. The chair corrected her immediately. She explained that no, the agent herself would be penalized. They were authorized to award 2 months' rent as compensation and penalty to her. The deposit would also be paid in full, plus interest at the standard rate. The chair turned to me and asked to confirm that I'd been there for 7 months. I said yes. She nodded and said it would be 7 months of interest then. She thanked everyone and declared the meeting adjourned. The lawyer and the agent both signed the forms, their faces filled with anger. They stormed out without another word. I sat there for a moment barely believing what had just happened. I thanked the chair sincerely. She told me something I'll never forget. She said we were all from this province and we weren't rich people. She was black and I was white, but we were citizens together and we both knew what it meant to suffer. These people who took advantage of us needed to know that we weren't powerless. I mentioned that this sort of thing happened a lot in this town. Her eyes brightened and she told me that if I knew of any other cases, I should give those people the tribunal's details. She added with a warm smile that many people didn't know about the tribunal and she'd really enjoyed driving here. I walked out of that library feeling 10 feet tall. Not only was I getting my deposit back with interest, but I was also getting 2 months' rent as compensation. I've been doing DoorDash for about 6 months now, ever since my hours got cut at my regular job. The gig pays decent, especially when I stick to my usual zone on the north side of the city. It's one of those areas where they're building new condos every other block, and the orders coming constantly. Most nights I can pull in enough to cover rent and then some. Last night was one of those shifts where everything felt slightly off from the start. I logged into the app and immediately got hit with shop and deliver orders back to back. Most dashers hate these orders because they take longer, but I've learned they're worth it. Instead of just picking up food and dropping it off, you're basically doing someone's grocery shopping for them. The pay is usually double what you'd get for a regular restaurant order, and honestly, I don't mind the extra steps. The app pinged me with 2 orders at once, both for the same drugstore location. You know the type, the chain with the green walls and red logo that seems to exist on every corner. I pulled into the parking lot and checked the items I needed to grab. Between both orders, I was looking at maybe 15 items total. Should be quick, I thought. Here's the thing about my work outfit. I keep it simple. Black gym pants because they're comfortable for all the walking and getting in and out of the car. Black polo shirt because it looks presentable enough without being too formal. No logos, no branding, just plain black. I've never had an issue with it before. I walked into the store and immediately noticed they didn't have any shopping carts or baskets available. Great. That meant I'd be juggling everything in my arms like some kind of circus act. I started grabbing items from my list, stacking them carefully so nothing would fall. Then I got to the drink section and encountered what might be the dumbest piece of technology I've ever seen in a retail store. Instead of clear fridge doors where you can actually see the products, they'd installed these massive digital screens. The screens are supposed to show you what's inside, but they're always wrong. Half the time they just play advertisements while you're trying to figure out if they have the specific brand of soda you need. Whoever invented these things clearly never had to actually use one. Tonight's special twist? The screens were completely dead, black, not working at all. So now nobody could see what drinks were available unless they opened each door individually and hoped for the best. I was searching for a specific energy drink that one of my customers wanted when 2 young guys came around the corner. They looked college-aged, maybe a bit younger. They stopped when they saw the blank screens. The first guy asked if the screens were dead. I told him the screens weren't working, but the fridges themselves were still functioning fine. The second guy asked where the juice was, and since I'd just been looking through one of the fridges, I let him know which one had the orange juice if that's what he needed. They thanked me and I moved on, arms already loaded with items. It didn't even cross my mind that they might have thought I was an employee. I was just being helpful, the way anyone would be. I made my way through the store, carefully balancing everything I was carrying. By the time I reached the center aisle, I had about 7 items stacked in my arms. Some were balanced more precariously than others, and I was moving slowly to make sure nothing fell. That's when I ran into the same 2 guys again. The first guy asked me where the toothbrushes were. I looked around, trying to spot the oral care section. We were standing right in front of first aid supplies, and I knew that wasn't the right area. I started to answer but hesitated because that's when it hit me. They thought I worked here. The second guy must have noticed my confusion because he asked if I actually worked at the store. I told them no, I was just there for DoorDash. Both guys immediately started cracking up, not in a mean way, but like they'd just realized something funny. They said they totally thought I was an employee. I laughed too and told them I completely understood why they'd think that, what with me carrying a bunch of stuff and wearing a plain polo shirt. I added that they were cool and pointed them toward the front of the store where I thought the toothbrushes might be. They thanked me again and we all went our separate ways. I finished gathering the rest of my items and headed to the checkout. The line wasn't too long, maybe 3 people ahead of me. I was waiting when the 2 guys got in line right in front of me. The first one turned around and started asking me questions about how DoorDash worked. He wanted to know if anyone could sign up. I explained that pretty much anyone could, long as they had a car, a valid license, and could pass a background check. The approval process usually took about a week. Then he asked if it was actually worth it, and if I made decent money doing it. I told him it really depended on the area and what times you worked. I explained that I usually worked nights and weekends in areas where there were lots of orders coming through. Some nights were definitely better than others, but I generally made enough to make it worth my time. The second guy chimed in, suggesting it had to be better than working retail. I agreed and joked that at least nobody mistook me for an employee when I was doing DoorDash, except for tonight, of course. We all laughed at that. They paid for their stuff and headed out, waving goodbye when they left the store. I checked out, loaded everything into my insulated bags, and made my deliveries. Both customers were happy, and both tipped well. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.